Hello everyone. Welcome to this session on impact of 15 Finance Commission recommendations for urban local bodies. I am Dr. Debarpita Roy. I am a policy researcher on issues pertaining to cities and urban centers in our country, including those of the very important sector of municipal finances. Now, municipalities are an integral part not only of our cities, their governance, but also of the fiscal infrastructure of our country. In India, for the large cities, we have municipal corporations. For slightly smaller cities, we have municipalities. Then for the small towns and urban centers, we have Nagar Panchayats. And then there are special ULBs, such as Notified Area Committee, Industrial Township, and Cantonment Boards. The role of the Finance Commission is to largely define the fiscal relations between the Union government and the states. But since the 74th Constitutional Amendment was enacted in 1993, it became a mandate of the CFCs, or the Central Finance Commissions, to recommend measures needed to augment the finances of a state to supplement the resources of the urban local bodies on the basis of recommendations made by the state finance commissions. Now, what are state finance commissions? We will come to it in a minute. The Central Finance Commission is a constitutional body which is set up every 5 years by the President under Article 280 of the Constitution. The main role or the purpose of the Commission is that the Commission recommends the distribution of resources between the center and the states from the divisible pool of taxes. The divisible pool of taxes is the taxes such as corporate tax, income tax, excise, central GST, which is collected by the Union government or the Government of India, and the Finance Commission, based on the need and requirement of all the states, suggests that what portion of those taxes should be shared with the states by the Government of India. This we refer to as vertical distribution. Now, this kitty or the portion of the divisible pool that is to be shared among the states, in what proportion should it be apportioned across the states, or what should be the distribution of the share among all the states, the distribution of the resources, of these resources across the states? That's the horizontal distribution. The Central Finance Commission takes a needs-based approach. Over and above that, the Commission also seeks to understand that is there any specific need that any specific state has of support in terms of resources from the central government. And thus, the principles of distributing grants and aid to states, which are additional sums paid to states in need of assistance, is also a task that the Central Finance Commission embarks on. And lastly, the topic of our interest and the institutions of our interest today, urban local bodies. For urban local bodies, the Central Finance Commission sets out the principles of transfers to local bodies of the states, which include Gram Panchayats and municipalities. Now, while constitutionally, a point it is important to note that while constitutionally, the Central Finance Commission is supposed to recommend what share of the divisible pool or the taxes which are collected by the Government of India is to be shared with the state governments, it doesn't have the mandate of doing the same for urban local bodies. But with the incorporation or the enactment of the 74th Amendment, it is supposed to recommend measures which is needed to improve the functioning of these urban local bodies, and it has been doing so since then, largely through the route of grants and aid recommendations from the central government, which are known as CFC transfers, or Central Finance Commission transfer from the Government of India to urban local bodies. Now, what impact, or what are the relationship largely, or what is it that the Finance Commission, or through how does the Finance Commission really do so? The recommendations of previous Central Finance Commissions pertaining to urban local bodies belong to three broad categories. One was the GIA, or the grants in aid, or they're also referred to simply as grants, to be transferred from the consolidated fund of the state to the ULBs. Now, by this grants of aid, I mean the CFC grant. The CFC grants are first transferred to the consolidated fund of states, and whereon it is the state has to within 10 days is supposed to share the grant amount with the respective urban local bodies. Increase the objectivity in the relationship between states and urban local bodies for bringing about greater transparency in the flows from states to urban local bodies and making such flows more predictable. Predictability and stability of financial resources of revenues is a key requirement for effective governance at any level of governance. And it has also been one of the key impediments that has held back our urban local bodies from being effective units, organizations which can govern our cities very, very effectively. So the Central Finance Commission has very strong views on this, and the 15th Finance Commission, as we will later discuss, has made it mandatory that state finance commissions have to be constituted and action taken reports on those have to be submitted to basically reach this objective. And thirdly, measures for augmenting urban local body resources by improving the functioning of urban local bodies and additional sources of urban local body revenues. The Central Finance Commission largely, for fructifying this particular objective, acts as an enabler, because the CFC grants that are given out, if one looks at it from the perspective of the total revenue, the total resource pool that the municipal or the urban local bodies have, is not substantial. This is one route that the Central Finance Commission uses these grants, the CFC grants, as incentives for setting the correct direction in which the urban local bodies should operate and how they should go about doing so. The Finance Commission allocations, as I've been saying, are not that significant as a proportion of the total revenues. But given the importance of cities in our country has been increasing over the years, so has been the Central Finance Commission grants for urban local bodies. They have been rising in absolute as well as in relative terms. So if we see between the 10th Finance Commission and the 15th Finance Commission, there has been almost a 80 to 90% jump as a share of the grants which are given rather as a percentage of the divisible pool and also as a portion of grants made available for all local bodies. All local bodies, I mean both rural local bodies and urban local bodies. Till the 12th Finance Commission, these grants were largely general or not linked to the performance of the ULBs or even the states and how they define their relationship with the ULBs. But the 13th Finance Commission brought about this paradigm shift, not only describe the grant amount, or define the grant amount as a proportion of the divisible pool of the consolidated for India, but it also introduced the concept of performance grants, which is linking that I will pay out this grant to you only if you satisfy certain conditions. The Finance Commission also defines And what should be the criteria for distribution of grants to local bodies among states? And initially, there were the criteria of equality and what efforts did the state make in kind of devolution was taken into account. The 14th Finance Commission took the call that it is not really a part of our mandate to enable, greater, rather the 14th Finance Commission felt that influencing the level of decentralization or the extent of devolution of powers and finances by states to the urban local bodies is not really their mandate. So, both the 14th and the 15th Finance Commission criteria for distribution, they define the criteria of distribution based on population and geographical area. Now coming to the topic of state finance commissions. State finance commissions are extremely important bodies, fiscal structure of India. The Part 9A, Article 243Y of the Constitution of India mandates that the state finance commissions have to review and recommend principles of devolution of state revenues to urban local bodies. So just like the government of India has a divisible pool and the Central Finance Commission considers the divisible pool, each state defines the revenues which they want to, or the revenue pool that should be considered when devising that what portion of that revenue pool has to be shared with the third tier local governments, which includes urban local bodies. And this varies across states. How that denominator or the base revenue pool is actually defined across states. Then the Article 243Y mandates that the State Finance Commission has to also do determination of revenue sources to be assigned to or appropriated by the urban local bodies. Taxes like motor vehicle tax, entertainment tax, and stamp duty are through the State Finance Commission suggests that what portion or maybe in the full amount should be transferred to urban local bodies. Again, this differs from state to state as we know. Thirdly, the provision of grants and aid to urban local bodies. This is not formula based as the devolution of state revenues to urban local bodies is supposed to be. This is again over and above this for in any specific year or over a specific period. If an urban local body has any specific requirement, that is met by the state through this aid channel. Then fourthly, the measures which are required to improve the ULB finances. What are the measures which is required to make urban local bodies self-sufficient, efficient and effective units of governance and administration? No, but over the years, the state finance commissions have not really lived up to the role that was envisaged for them. Successive CFCs, while the Central Finance Commission is mandated to recommend measures to augment the finances of a state to supplement the resources of its municipalities on the basis of recommendations made by the State Finance Commissions, what we find is over the years, successive Central Finance Commissions have reported their inability to make use of the reports of the State Finance Commissions. They find that the recommendations were ad hoc. They were not based on sound and scientific principles of public finance. The reports were not available on a timely basis. State Finance Commission was constituted, but the report was delayed. If the report was even tabled, it was not of it was not good enough many a times, or the recommendations were not strong enough, robust enough to be accepted by the state governments, and the period was also not synchronized with that of the period of the central finance commissions. Then several states have also formed their successive state finance commission, while the action taken report for the previous state finance commission was still under consideration. The definition of revenue pool, as I mentioned before, has also varied across various state finance commission, which further complicates the task of the central finance commission. Certain finance commissions in the past went on record stating in their reports that we are unable to use the state finance commission reports, the recommendations, and the picture that they uphold of the finances of the urban local bodies through them. And this inability has in a way also affected municipal finances in our country in an adverse fashion. Thus, the 15th Finance Commission, recognizing the importance of state finance commissions as institutions, or rather as a body with a very key body for the smooth functioning and effective functioning of the third tier of government, they say, and of the state governments also as such, they say that they recommend that all states which have not done so far must constitute the State Finance Commission, act upon their recommendations, lay the explanatory memorandum as to what action has been taken on the recommendations of the respective state finance commissions before the legislature on or before March 2024. After that, no grants will be released to a state that has not complied with the constitutional provisions in respect of the state finance commissions and these conditions. The Ministry of Panchayati Raj will be certifying the compliance of all the constitutional provisions by a state in this respect before the release of their share of grants for fiscal year 2024 and 2025. Thus, this is an extremely important recommendation that has been made by the 15th Central Finance Commission and has been accepted. Now, coming to set the context a bit more, we discussed that what is the state of, we take a very bird's eye view of what is the state of municipal finances in our country. As we all know, there's a lot more to be desired, a lot of improvement, there's a lot of scope of improvement, and there is no two ways of saying it, but municipalities in our country, with the exception of one or two municipal corporations such as the MCGM, and to some the Bangalore Municipal Corporation, the municipalities are fiscally and financially weak in our country. Municipal revenue and municipal expenditure are not growing at the same pace as the country and even the city economies. We all know city economies have been growing faster than India's GDP. But that is not the case in case of our municipal finances. While the city economies have been growing, municipal finances have been languishing. And due to which, and here we see that the municipal revenues is just about 1% of our GDP, which in certain countries, other developing countries, like Brazil, it is around 7.4% of the GDP. In South Africa, it is around 6% of the GDP. And the difference of about 0.2% in terms of GDP that we see between the municipal revenue and the municipal expenditure is primarily due to two reasons. One, that there is a requirement, usually enshrined in our Municipal Corporation Acts, that the urban local bodies have to be maintaining a balanced budget. And also, the practices of capturing the data pertaining to finances is deficient. There's a lack, and there is glaring deficiencies in the budgets, in the availability of budgets, and the audited accounts. Practice of sharing of accounts in the public domain is also one criteria that the 15th Finance Commission has put forth. We also see that the decline in share of own revenues as a proportion of municipal revenues, the trend has been a declining one, that the share of own revenues in municipal revenues has been declining over time. That is, the autonomy or the autonomous power of the municipal bodies and the urban local bodies in raising their own revenues have been on a decline. And as a result of which, there has been the share of transfers from both the central government and state government has been rising. And the situation has further worsened with the advent of GST. Now, wide interstate differences do exist in this, but in general, there is no state that we can say is on a very robust or firm footing as far as the functioning of their and the fiscal condition of their urban local bodies is. Municipal revenue components, just to take you very quickly through it, the own revenue part, or the revenue which is collected by the urban local bodies themselves, constitute of the own tax revenue, of which the sizable portion is property tax. Then comes professional tax, which is a largely untapped source, entertainment tax. And the own and non-tax revenues are in the form of fees and charges. Then the state transfers, which are usually the more sizable part, the sizable chunk of portion of transfers, of total transfers being transfers to state from the state government and the central government, and state transfers are usually much more than the transfers from the central government, which includes the Government of India transfers under various centrally sponsored schemes, central sector schemes, and the CFC grants, which is the grants from the Finance Commission. And then we have borrowings. Again, since the financial practices that are being followed by your municipalities, and since the financial condition of our municipalities is weak, borrowings have been few and far between in the urban local body space. Of late, of course, over the last 10-15 years, few municipal corporations have floated municipal bonds, notable among them being Ahmedabad, Pune, and of the last one being Hyderabad. But yet it has been largely the potential that of the source of funds for the municipal finances has been far from realized. The most important tax and the source of own revenue which is collected by by urban local bodies is property tax. It is 60% of own tax revenues across all Indian urban local bodies and is just about 0.15% of GDP, whereas it is 1% of GDP in OECD countries. Now, even here, our cities are growing, real estate prices are rising, but property tax collections are not rising in tandem. This also is an issue which was taken into consideration by the 15th Finance Commission. Then coming to the issue of municipal expenditure. Municipal expenditure is largely dominated by revenue expenditure, which shows that there is a lot of scope for improvement in capital expenditure, that is creation of infrastructure at the city level for provision of basic services and improving the quality of life of its citizens. There are considerable challenges which also exist in terms of the execution and inability to spend funds. It is not that giving or having funds is enough, but how able are the urban local bodies of utilizing those funds and having and improving their capacity. Thus, investment in capacity building along with increase in capital expenditure is extremely important for urban local bodies. Now we come to the third part of our presentation, which is how have urban local bodies, what have been the recommendations regarding urban local bodies by the 15th Finance Commission. The 15th Finance Commission recommended, and all these recommendations have been accepted. So the 15th Finance Commission says that a state and thereon urban local body becomes eligible for a central the CFC grant, the Central Finance Commission grant in a given year, subject to the annual accounts of the previous financial year is available online and in the public domain. Now, largely by this, what is meant is that there is a portal called cityfinance.in, which is available on the internet and which is maintained by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs of Government of India. The annual accounts of previous FY is available online on that portal as well as on the respective websites of the urban local bodies, wherever the local bodies have a website. Then audited accounts of the previous financial year is available online and in public domain. These accounts have to include the balance sheet, income and expenditure statement, cash flow statement, schedules to balance sheet, income and expenditure statement. This is the first condition. In the first year, 2021-22, 25%, even if 25% of the ULBs in the first 2 years, this is 21-22 and 22-23, the entire CFC grant can be transferred. But thereon, it will be transferred on a pro rata basis. So if only 40% of all the urban local bodies in a given state satisfy this condition, that is the amount of grant that will be transferred to the consolidated fund of the state for further transmission and transferring to the urban local bodies. The second condition pertains to property tax. So the first condition pertains to the availability of account statements and audited account statements. The second condition pertains to property tax. State governments have to notify the floor rates of property tax across urban local bodies for the state. And then they will be eligible for grants from 2022-23. For the first year, it doesn't pertain. For 2021 also, it doesn't really apply. But the floor rates have to be notified, and also it has the mechanism for collection of property tax at this floor rate. At minimum, this floor rate has also got to be activated. And another necessary condition is growth in property tax in tandem with the gross state domestic product. The simple average of the growth in gross state domestic product over the last 5 years. The growth in property tax has to be more than that, 2023-24 onwards. To sum up, thus, for the fiscal year 2020-21-22 and 2022-23, to receive the full Central Finance Commission grant, state government has to ensure accounts availability for the last 2 years for 25% of ULBs. And linking with the public finance management system in the financial year 2022-23. In the financial year 2022-23, property tax floor rates have to be provided by required amendments to the municipal acts and operationalized. Plus, of course, the first criteria pertaining to the availability of accounts of the previous year and audited accounts of the previous year has to be met. From the third year onwards, or from 2023-24 onwards, both these criterias, first two criterias on the left hand side of the slide, have to be met, and in addition to that, it has to be the first condition on the left side has to be applicable for all ULBs, not just for 25%. Otherwise, you get the grant in a pro rata fashion. Then secondly, the growth rate of the urban local body's annual property tax has to mirror the average 5-year growth rate of the gross-state domestic product. This is two extremely pertinent conditions, and particularly the first condition is something which will infuse, the first condition pertaining to the availability of accounts will infuse a lot of transparency into the finances of the third tier. Being a researcher in this domain, the availability of accounts, the availability of budgets, the availability of accounts which are easy to understand, easy to make sense of as to how our municipality is doing, how have they been improving the municipal finances, been extremely difficult. Data availability in the public domain is extremely poor across the board for almost all ULBs. Finally, the distribution of grants between the million-plus cities and other cities in a state is on the basis of population. That's a point that we have to keep in mind. Now, the 15th Finance Commission recognized that cities are agglomeration economies, and the city boundary and employment activities, availability of labor and availability of resources, as well as the problems that a city faces, is not just constrained, limited to the boundary of a urban local body. Thus, we have the concept of an urban agglomeration. India has about 50 plus million plus cities, which have a population of 1 million and above. And quite a few of them are urban agglomerations. So, for these 50 cities and urban agglomerations, the Finance Commission, the 3 million plus cities and urban agglomerations of the National Capital Territory of Delhi, Srinagar and Chandigarh are outside the ambit of the Finance Commission because they are union territories. So, but the Finance Commission demarcated, or rather divided, the grant for all urban local bodies into two. One for the million plus cities, and they called it the Million Plus Cities Challenge Fund. And this fund, this mode of transmission was completely linked to performance or tied. That unless you perform, you are not going to get the grant. That's the message that has been conveyed loud and clear to the states and to the urban local bodies. The second part of the division is for non-million plus cities or other cities, as we will refer to. There it is not that the 100% of the grant amount is in the form of tied grants. There 40% of it is also in the form of untied grants. We will just come to that in a moment. For the 50 cities and urban agglomerations, this Million Plus Cities Challenge Fund was recommended by the Finance Commission. And this grant was to be in the form of performance grant. Of the 50 cities and urban agglomerations, there are 6 cities and 44 of these 50 are urban agglomeration. The state government has to identify one nodal urban local body who will be responsible, which the body will be responsible, and this body will be responsible for achieving the level set or achieving the performance level set, that the performance level mandated by the Central Finance Commission has been met, and then only will the grant be released. Now, what are urban agglomerations? The 2011 census identifies urban agglomerations as contiguous urban settlements having a population of more than 20,000, and there should be at least one urban local body in that urban agglomeration. The 74th Constitutional Amendment required to designate a million-plus population urban area as a metropolitan area and form a metropolitan planning committee. But not much really happened on that front. But I say that the concept of urban agglomeration is extremely important, because city boundaries do not remain confined within the urban local body boundaries, in particular urban local body boundary. The grant amount, which was earmarked under this Million Plus Cities Challenge Fund for these 44 urban agglomerations and the 6 cities, was earmarked and linked to achieving indicators in a 1:2 ratio, the two indicators being ambient, the two principal areas in which the indicators were achieving ambient air quality and achieving certain benchmarks in provision of drinking water, sanitation and solid waste management services by the urban local body. In case of the urban agglomerations, the nodal urban local body, and in case of the 6 cities, the ULB, are responsible for submitting detailed annual reports on measures of recycling and reuse of water, wastewater, rejuvenation of water bodies and water in general, and what have been the achievements that they have done on these past. And they have to publish all the 28 service level benchmarks and their targets. So the nodal urban local body in case of an urban agglomeration and an urban agglomeration in case of the 6 million plus cities, they also have to do these two things. That is, submit a detailed annual report on measures, water recycling, wastewater management, rejuvenation of water bodies, basically management of water, and they have to also publish the 28 service level benchmarks and their targets. And this publishing has also got to be done on the cityfinance.in portal. The distribution of the grants then among these 50 cities and urban agglomerations will be based on their population. Now coming to the first condition of ambient air quality. Grant is to be given based on evaluation of the ambient air quality, based on the strengthening of institutional framework, source-wise analysis for air pollution, progress and action plans and compliance of statutory guidelines, and quantification of improvement in air quality in the financial year 2021-22. Post that, in year 2, 3 and 4, the first 3 conditions do not have to be met, since you anyway have to, if you want to improve your air quality, you anyway have to strengthen your institutional framework. You have to do a robust source-wise analysis of air pollution, and you also have to very clearly be clear and table and draw up your action plans and how you will comply with the statutory guidelines. So these three are a part of the process for achieving a improvement in air quality, and these three are essential, are a part of the parameters which have to be met in year 2021-22. But thereon, in financial year 22 onwards, 2022-23 onwards, it is quantification of improvement in air quality, which is the only indicator which has to be met. The quantification of improvement in air quality will again be tracked through two indicators. One is the reduction in particulate matter, or PM 0.5, PM10, we keep on reading in the newspapers. The reduction in particulate matter, if the reduction is more than 15%, okay, you have achieved a high score on your indicator, on this particular indicator, otherwise your score is low. Similarly, an increase in number of good days according to improvement in the air quality index, or AQI. If this increase again is 15% or more, your indicator is rated as high, otherwise it is rated as low. The monitoring and drawing up of these action plans, which will be done by the urban local governments, the MOEFCC is the key nodal agency. MOEFCC is the Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change of Government of India. So that is the key nodal agency. They will also certify that to what extent have the performance indicators been met by the ULBs based on the reports which are conveyed to them by the state governments. In the Finance Commission report, there was a lot of stress on open waste burning, combustion at landfills, and activities of formal industries. And both MOEFCC and the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs will have to be helping the ULBs to be achieving these targets, particularly in setting their action plans. And MOEFCC will be the nodal ministry for even certifying that yes, this particular ULB has met the criteria, and so thereon the grant can be, based on this criteria, the commensurate grant can be released. There's already the component of electric vehicles under the central sector schemes like Amrut. And so the role of MOEFCC and the importance, there's been a lot of importance given to reducing pollution and improving the air quality in the 1 million+ cities. Now, each state government and urban agglomeration, or the urban local body for the 50 million+ cities in US, shall sign a MOU with MOEFCC for a year-wise action plan, agreed outcomes to be achieved, and quantum of funds to be released. Action plans have to contain city-wise details of sources of air pollution and the proposed measures to be taken by them, such as deployment of sweeping machines, promotion of cycling and walking, and paving the side flanks of the road for facilities for water percolation in case of rains, that no flooding occurs in our cities. MOEFCC has to also closely work with state pollution control boards for strengthening air quality monitoring infrastructure in our cities. There's a lot of emphasis being placed on not only improving the air quality in your cities, but also how that should be done, and how the Government of India can help along with the state governments, because the state governments have to be an integral part of this exercise in achieving this. And again, there has to be a necessary condition is public dissemination of this data and indicators has to be done through a dedicated link on the ULB website. Now coming to the second necessary condition of a million for rather getting the million plus the grants, the CFC grants by million plus cities from the Million Plus Cities Challenge Fund is that of pertains to the provision of service, drinking water supply, sanitation and solid waste management in our cities. All the service level benchmarks should pertaining to these three, rather especially pertaining to these three, drinking water supply, sanitation and solid waste management, should be published on the cityfinance.in portal along with audited and annual accounts. Now, having said that, the Central Finance Commission also recommends that service level benchmark should be continued to be published on all the 28 benchmarks which are there. Each state government and the urban agglomeration and the respective city ULB should sign a memorandum of understanding with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs for year-wise action plans, agreed outcomes, quantum of funds to be released and put them, and these should be available in the public domain. Performance of each urban agglomeration and the respective ULBs for each service level benchmark for a year will be placed in public domain. Grant will be released in a single installment in a year, and MAHUA and the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs will be recommending the release of the grant, and then the Ministry of Finance will release it. So the ministry, now this particular condition for the million plus cities, UAs and urban agglomerations and cities is necessary for the release of funds from 2021 to the entire period, rather covering from 2021 to 2026. No conditions are there for 2020-21. So 2021 these grants will be available, and it's a time that has been given to the respective million plus cities for getting their act together on this. Then the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs of the Government of India will evaluate performance of service level benchmark indicators of solid waste management, water supply quality and water conservation methods. And this will be done under these indicators or the service level benchmarks, which will pertain to households covered with piped water supply, water supplied in liter per capita per day, and reduction in non-revenue water. Now the benchmarks for these is available in a document on the cityfinance.in website and has already been circulated with respective to all ULBs, I hope. Then on the water conservation methods, we have service level benchmarks pertaining to rainwater harvesting, reuse, recycling of water, rejuvenation of water bodies. Then in solid waste management and sustaining the outcomes of the Swachh Bharat mission, the indicators are the garbage-free rating of cities and coverage of water supply for public and community toilet. Now under all these indicators, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs will be the nodal agency for certifying that yes, this particular ULB has met these conditions of service level benchmarks based on the report which will be submitted by the respective state governments. There will be a memorandum of understanding with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs between the 50 million plus cities and urban agglomerations, which detail out their annual action plans, outcomes and funds to be released. The funds to be released will be in a single installment to the state government, and all information has to be published online. Now coming to other cities or non-million cities. So to summarize, for million cities, they have to meet the necessary condition of publishing their previous year's annual accounts in the public domain and their audited accounts for the previous year in the public domain. Secondly, the property tax floor rates have to be set and the process of collection for the same has to be operationalized. Now, these two are necessary conditions. Even if one of these conditions are not met, no grant will be released. The other conditions for the million plus cities which have to be met for the grants to be released are that you have to meet certain parameters, you have to improve the air quality, you have to meet certain service level benchmarks, and then only will grants be released. Now there are slabs also, there are recommendations, there is very strong robust framework which the Central Finance Commission has suggested in terms of how is that to be interpreted, how is in terms of the grants to be released in what proportion, etc., which I will not go down into detail. But these are the 4 conditions which have to be met for the release, for getting the Central Finance Commission grants by any respective urban local body, in which are of urban local body for million plus cities. Now coming to non-million cities, 40% of the Central Finance Commission grant to non-million cities is untied. That is the usage, or they are not really specified to any particular condition apart from the first 2, which is that your annual account for the previous year has to be published and the audited and annual accounts for the previous year has to be published in the public domain, and the property tax floor rate has to be specified and the collection of the same has to be operationalized. So that proof has to be, unless that proof is shared, you wouldn't even be getting this. But then the 60% of the grants meant for these cities is tied to the delivery of basic services. This you will get only if you again meet certain parameters, indicators, satisfy certain indicators in your delivery of basic services. 30% of this 60%, half of it is earmarked for sanitation and solid waste management, and 30% or half of it rather is earmarked for drinking water, rainwater harvesting and water cycling. The intra-city allocations across non-million cities is based on SFC recommendations or on a 90:10 ratio, 9:10 ratio in terms of population and the area. Cantonment boards were also given similar treatment as non-million cities, and the grants are to be allotted on the basis of population. Now, the 15th Finance Commission, in the current situation that we all have been facing, that of the COVID pandemic, realized the importance that urban local bodies have to play in the provision of primary health care. And in India anyway, about 70% of the public expenditure in health is by state governments and the rest is by the union government. But at the grassroots level, the role that the primary healthcare units, primary healthcare institute, centers have to play is phenomenal, as this pandemic has shown us. There was a high-level group on health sector which was set up by the 15th Finance Commission, and there were efforts. It was recognized that efforts to achieve the ideal of universal health has to be very seriously implemented, and that the ULBs play a key role in delivering of primary healthcare services, and thus it's a necessity to strengthen the urban local bodies in terms of resources, health infrastructure and capacity building. And then only will they be able to play a very important role in the healthcare delivery. So the Finance Commission, 16.8%, 17% nearly of the 15 Finance Commission grants to local bodies have been earmarked for the primary healthcare. For primary and under primary healthcare for two specific purposes. One, support for diagnostic infrastructure at primary healthcare facilities. Right, so for blood tests, X-rays, etc., all the diagnostic services that we avail of. And then support for urban health and wellness centers. And the grants for each of these purposes to each state is specified in the annexures of the 15th Finance Commission report. In addition to this recommendation, which tied the provision of health expenditure and local governments and urban local bodies, there were two other grants which were given for specific purposes pertaining to urban local bodies. One was a grant for incubation of new cities. Whenever a new city, now urbanization will happen in our country, both through, of course, expansion of the existing cities, and India has a sizable number of very small cities, which is roughly more than half, rather, of the total number of cities that we have. And they will also grow. But in addition to that, new cities also would have to be set up. And on a pilot basis, this grant has been given. So it's a performance-based challenge fund for setting up 8 cities across India. So 8 state governments will be receiving a grant of rupees 1,000 crore for setting up a new city. The cities are, of course, to be identified, and this will be done through a tender, which will be for the bid mechanism, and the tender mechanism will be floated by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. So the bid parameters and eligibility criteria to be identified by an expert committee for the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and this will be done largely. This is being done as we speak currently, and will be the process, the entire the bid criteria, etc., and the parameters which have to be satisfied in the bid for the setting up of a city and availing this grant, I think will be done by March, this year March. We're in February now, which is March 2022. Then there's a grant which is given, which is mandated for the setting up of a national data center, largely for the promotion of shared services across municipalities. Now, the services which are given by urban local bodies, no matter big, small, etc., is a lot of the services are very similar in nature. So if the concept of aggregating, rather the demand for such services at a central, in a central fashion in a given region across smaller urban local bodies can be done, that will definitely, help in achieving rather more effective provision of the services, bring down the cost of provision of such services. So basically, in a way, Uberization of the provision of municipal services, and these doing this will also enhance the own revenues, because usually you get a user charge in certain cases for the provision of the services, access municipal borrowings more effectively if own revenues are firmed up, and implement, of course, effective implementation or effective provision of the services will be enabled. And this will also have a strong impact on making the municipalities market worthy. The municipal shared services that will be largely handled. What do we mean by municipal shared services? What all services are covered is issue of birth and death certificates, trade licenses, grievance redressal. So basically we follow a model close to that of the Passport Seva Kendra in terms of creation of these rather nodal agencies or not the nodal of these aggregate centers for provision of the services across urban local bodies, and they will and these centers will also function as a centralized processing center for accounting, vendor payments, payroll processing, like the central government income tax centers too. Income tax center does, right? So even because smaller urban local bodies do not have the capacity to rather involve external parties, they might not be having the financial capacity, or they might not be having the internal capacity of putting forth their accounts in a timely fashion in the public domain, which is required for availing the Central Finance Commission grant. And not only that, it's very much required to improve the functioning of the urban local body. It's a very essential rather requirement. It's a need of the hour. So even that can be attempted to be done through this municipal shared services. And then doorstep and field level services such as collection and maintenance and optimizing the use of field staff across urban local bodies will be shared, right? And thus a plan needs to be drawn up that, where will these centers be set up and how will this aggregation of services happen across ULBs by the ULBs in collaboration with the state governments. So to sum up, for the non-million cities, the cities for availing the Central Finance Commission grants have to meet the criteria of publication of their previous year accounts in the public domain and the previous to previous year audited account in the public domain. Also, state government has to notify the property tax floor rate for that urban local body. Now, these two are necessary conditions. And certain rather conditions pertaining to service level benchmarks have to be met. And as regards to the grants which will be given for public health and incubation of new cities and the municipal shared services, they will be based on rather the public they will be based on population criteria or the bids submitted and the plan which will be drawn up for the municipal shared services. And hopefully these are done soon. Now coming to what are the implications of the CFC, the 15th Finance Commission recommendations. As I mentioned before, the impact or rather the share of the Central Finance Commission grants in the total revenues for municipal revenue is not that substantial. It's largely, it could be that for certain years, if a urban local body does not meet the conditions which have been set out by the Central Finance Commission, it will not get a Central Finance Commission grant. To that for certain, if it does meet all the conditions, it will be getting that grant, but that grant might be just be in the, vary in the range of maybe 5 to 25% of its total revenues. So the impact on revenues or the resources that Central Finance Commission grants have are not very substantial. But the incentive structure which is set out in term by the Central Finance Commission for availing these grants thus give a very clear roadmap, a direction, sets the direction for that roadmap, that what are the areas that these urban local bodies have to focus on. So if you're a million plus city, air pollution is a very big problem for you, and you will require, you have to, as a local government, you are accountable for that, and you have to take steps, you have to work with the union government, you have to work along with the state government, take their help, and lower pollution in your city. Now also, and then the Finance Commission recognizes that there are 8 cities in which this problem is not much. 8 cities in Kerala, 7 cities in Kerala, and 1 city in Tamil Nadu. And there this condition does not hold for those 8 million plus cities, but for the rest this holds. And Similarly, property tax, the importance of property tax. Property tax is the only buoyant source of own revenue which the urban local bodies have. And collection of the same has to be improved. And that's why the requirement that you have to set out a minimum floor rate. Because instead of floor rates are the current practices, that in many cases there is a ceiling set to the property tax rate. And that affects property tax collections and the revenue generated on account of property tax. The other implications, which are that incentivizing the state government's accountability regarding State Finance Commission. The condition that by March 2024, State Finance Commissions have to be set up and the action taken report has to be tabled. Which recommendations have you accepted? Which recommendations have you revised? Which recommendations you have not rejected, right? That has to be clearly communicated. That has to be done. Without that, any particular government, state government will not be getting any grants. So this is a very seminal step towards increasing the credibility and robustness of the institution of state finance commissions. The state finance commissions have to play a very effective role in the fiscal structure of our country to ensure that urban local bodies will become more effective units of governance and administration. Without robust recommendations from state finance commissions, it's a task which will be very onerous for the state governments to achieve, to make urban local bodies as vibrant, effective units. The second major positive implication, is that the Central Finance Commission grants gives a lot of importance to the financial accountability of our urban local bodies. And availability of accounts is the first step towards that. Public disclosure of accounts has been made mandatory for all ULBs. So this will definitely incentivize the ULBs for being accountable to the citizens. The Central Finance Commission incentivizing the ULBs. This will make the ULBs accountable to the citizens if taken in the right spirit. And of course, there will be better availability of data and municipal finances and administration. Ultimately, it will help in making the ULBs more market worthy, enable them to raise access credit way more easily. Then performance-linked grants such as improvement in property tax collection and those linked to improving the air quality, service levels are also very important. Improvement in property tax collection will ultimately increase the revenue base of the urban local bodies, make them more financially autonomous, more independent. The stress on state government resources will be lesser, and with growth in property tax collections, expenditure levels by urban local bodies should increase, and better services, and thus the provision of basic services should also increase in due course, and which will have an effect on the quality of life the city's citizens. The performance-linked grants for air quality and service levels will of course should have a direct impact in the quality of life for citizens. Those of us who live in the metropolitan cities know how severely we are affected by the problem of pollution, and this has to be tackled head on. So again, through this channel of linking the improvement in air quality to the availability of the Central Finance Commission grants for million plus cities, it will ultimately help in achieving the objective of cleaner air in our cities. This Finance Commission takes an urban agglomeration approach, an approach which has not been really taken previously. So, as I mentioned, it was a mandate. Metropolitan cities were recognized in this 74th Constitutional Amendment, and planning boards were supposed to be set up, but not really for the metropolitan area, but not much was achieved there. So this urban agglomeration focus, or the UA focus, will strengthen the governance and administration of the metropolitan region of million plus cities. The million plus cities, as per the 2012 census, has about 40 to 43% of the entire urban population. And while they have myriad problems, they will continue to be magnets for labor. They will continue to be centers where there are very high level of social and physical infrastructure present compared to the rest of the country. So their importance is not going down any soon. And thus this urban agglomeration focus and the special focus on million plus cities will definitely go a long way in improving the quality of life in these cities. The municipal shared services for the smaller urban local bodies, the concept of municipal shared services is a very important one, and it will, if implemented correctly, if the plan for doing the same is done correctly, and it might be a slightly long run process, but it will go a long way in improving the quality of services provided by these cities. And it also, of course, opens up the provision of third-party provision of services, which will allow possibly for more effective provision of the services, and the urban local bodies to focus on their core areas of their operations. But there's also a pitfall of rather making all the CFC grant linked to something, both for million plus cities and the non-million plus cities. We do run the risk of low actual allocation of the 15th Finance Commission grants to the urban local bodies. Because a lot of these grants are tied grants, right? Apart from the 40%, which is of untied nature for the non-million cities. So unless urban local body is able to satisfy these conditions, these grants will not be transferred. The urban local bodies will finally not get these grants, and these grants will remain unutilized in the manner that they are envisaged to be utilized. Hope you found this discussion to be useful, and if you do have any further questions or comments, you can reach out to this email ID mentioned on this slide. Thank you so much for taking out the time for listening to this.